I think I'll just talk about a few news stories and start up because people may trickle in. They may just watch the video later. So DEF CON is canceled, DEF CON China. China requested a cancellation of it. They say for 6 months, they're going to block all meetings like this, which surprised me. I was also very surprised that they blocked travel out of a whole province of China. And then all the nations like America and France said they're going to fly all their people out of there back home, which would seem like exactly the opposite of what you want to do. Yes, all because of the virus. And as I thought, the scientific evidence shows this is all nonsense. This has nothing to do with accomplishing anything. I mean, the fact is there are already cases in America and Europe and everywhere, and the thing has an incubation period of like 5 to 14 days where you're infectious, so it's already spread. This travel ban accomplishes nothing to protect people from the virus. It's just a way to appear to have done something. It's so I think China, when they had SARS, they just tried to lie and pretend there was no problem for a while and were greatly criticized. So now they're just compensating by doing the opposite to a ridiculous extent. But anyway, this is politics. I used to get very frustrated by this. And I began to realize appearances matter. So China is making it look like they did something. You would think that under a totalitarian government where they do not have to put up with criticism from the press or get reelected, that they would no longer have to do something just for show, but apparently they still have to do things just for show. And I guess it's a good thing because I'm sure they would like to just move in with the army and crush the rebellion in Hong Kong. But I have heard from a lot of people, including people in Hong Kong, have said that they can't do that because they don't want to look bad. So in the international community. So anyway, and this is certainly a big part of the CISSP kind of thing. Managing a company is a matter not only of doing what logically makes sense to accomplish your goals, but also watching your image and trying to avoid offending people, even if it doesn't really make any sense. And I remember feeling like that was not important, but I realize it is pretty important. For example, I'm concerned I may have to quit teaching in Saudi Arabia because there's so many bad articles about Saudi Arabia. And even though I don't necessarily agree, there comes a point when the public relations is so bad that I shouldn't associate with it. Anyway, so there was a Enigma conference in San Francisco, which I've never gotten into. It's one of the more academic conferences, hard to get into. But anyway, they had a presentation about the Clipper chip, which was one of the examples of how to do a backdoor incorrectly. And this is what most cryptographers say, is that the only thing the US government is capable of is stupid backdoors like this, and that's why we have to let them have no backdoor and tell the FBI and everybody that they cannot get into phones. I don't agree with that, but this is the example. They just forced everybody to buy a piece of hardware with broken encryption in it. They used a stupid encryption system that could be broken, and so they were ridiculously, foolishly forcing everyone to spend money to install broken security and things, and it was a disaster. And if you believe that they cannot learn and do any, and that you should not help them do anything better, then of course there won't be any backdoors in encryption. But anyway, it is an important historical issue. And that the one thing on the side of the currently fashionable position of the cryptographers, which is certainly true, is that previous attempts to give law enforcement a backdoor have been a disaster. I tend to think we could do it better, but the evidence is, I don't have a proof of concept of my position. And so, yeah, here's another one of these bad stories. Apparently, this guy was a critic of the Saudi regime, so they forced his father to fly to this country and brought an agent along with him to kidnap him to take him back to kill him in Saudi Arabia. And he said they do this all the time. They kidnap Saudi citizens from American soil to take them back and kill them. And then there's Jeff Bezos saying that the Saudi prince hacked his phone. And you know, this is creating very bad press for Saudi America and America. It's Saudi Arabia and America. Anyway, this was very interesting. Avast and AVG are very popular free antivirus products, and they have both been caught selling your personal data, your URLs and other information to advertising agencies covertly. So that is pretty nasty and a thing to be aware of. Anyway, it's pretty easy to spot this. You can just run something like Wireshark and see where it's going. Here's another Spectre and Meltdown type speculative execution flaw. There's a whole bunch of these still coming out. You may remember about 2 years ago when Spectre and Meltdown appeared, there was a intrinsic logical flaw in the look ahead feature of multi-threaded CPUs, where they begin processing some instructions before other instructions have been processed. So they will begin to do things that they are not allowed to do before they realize they're not allowed to do it. And that can cause information to leak out. And so they said that these were fundamental hardware flaws and that all the patches were superficial and they couldn't really patch the main flaw. So more vulnerabilities would come, and they have been coming. So here's another one of them. There's a steady chain of these vulnerabilities that processors, in order to be faster, are less secure. And as far as I have heard, there is still no update to the hardware. They said we're all going to have to replace all our processors with a more secure kind of processor, but that thing does not exist yet. Yeah.
Yeah, multi-threaded processors are central to this kind of stuff. What about like the GPUs?
I have not heard anything about GPUs. I'm just guessing, but my impression is that GPUs don't have all these security rules because they're not supposed to be doing that kind of processing. They're supposed to be doing massively parallel processing for things like images.
Well, what about GPUs built on like Intel's chips?
Yeah, I don't know. I know that in the main processor attempts to have a secure environment, has special places to put secrets, like the secure enclave and stuff, and those have all been leaking out because of this. And it tries to have the separation between kernel mode and user land, and all those are the barriers that are broken. I don't think a GPU has any reason to have any of that. The only
accesses the same RAM.
It does access the same RAM, but I don't think people, it's a very good question, and I really don't know. My impression, though, is that the point of GPUs is to be massively parallel for fast processing, and they don't have all of these security concerns. But I don't know. It's a very good question. I've not heard of any such attacks against GPUs. I don't think GPUs are even multi-threading or anything. I don't think they have any of these accelerations or any of these security features. I think GPUs are designed just for speed and nothing else, but I'm not sure. Anyway, so California passed AB 5 to try to make Uber give benefits to their lawyers. Uber is vigorously squirming out of it by trying to carefully adjust the working conditions of Uber drivers so they do not fit within the definition of this law, which is a thing to be aware of. When people try to pass a law to force a business to do something, what businesses do is try to squeeze into the loophole of the law. So anyway, and they're claiming that small businesses are now suffering. They'll have to give benefits to all their workers and stuff. But I think this law is only supposed to apply to fairly large businesses. Anyway, a lot of people are complaining. And Google Chrome has apps that run in Chrome. This was intended for Chromebooks, and some of them were paid apps, and there's some kind of crime going on where they trick you into paying for things. So for the time being, they have just stopped all paid extensions. So I guess that would primarily be an issue for Chromebooks. I don't know how many people are actually using paid extensions anyway. Anyway, so let's carry on with the official stuff. Let me just point out the schedule. We're here in 125. Everybody that wanted to add, I have approved your ads. So we're going to do the first part of chapter 1 here, which should be largely a review of your Security Plus knowledge. And then we'll do more of this next time. And wait out here, you should turn in your first topic and then start doing your presentations. And your papers come due later, not until March. All right, so here we are with security and risk management. Like I say, this chapter is pretty much all review of Security Plus. So hopefully this is material you've seen before. Basic security terms and disaster recovery and so on. Like I say, a large amount of material, but it's at a very superficial level. So the main thing, of course, in security, you have confidentiality, availability, and integrity. These are the 3 desirable things, and you cannot get one of them without subtracting from the others. You can't have all 3. But basically, the amount of all 3 you have depends on your budget. And for a fixed amount of money, you can have more of one or more of the other at the expense of the third. So you can also talk about the opposite. The opposite of availability is destruction, and the opposite of integrity is alteration, and the opposite of confidentiality is disclosure, if you like. So confidentiality means that only authorized people can read data. That's the point. And things like HIPAA. The main point of HIPAA was availability. It was to make it so that medical records were put on computer systems, so you didn't, if you were to travel somewhere and get hit by a bus, the ambulance that picked you up would not have any way to check to see if you're allergic to drugs, because it would be written on paper in your doctor's office in some other country. or in some other town. So that was the point of this, was portability was the number one thing, to make sure that medical records were available all over the place, and therefore they would also have to be maintained with some level of security. So that was why HIPAA, we think of it as a security recommendation, and it is, but the first issue of security, as usual, was availability. And the second issue was confidentiality. And implied is integrity, but it's not as high a priority here. So confidentiality means only people who have approval should get it. So in a military access control system, a mandatory access control, they would have to have clearance, like secret or top secret. They'd have to have approval or need to know. These are commonly things they would have to have the ability to access data. Integrity means that people do not have right access to data without authorization. So they cannot modify data, which sounds a lot like confidentiality, but it is in principle the difference between read access and write access. So people should not be able to make unauthorized modifications, and you should have some kind of consistency and error checking available to prevent this. So you have things like access controls and authentication, intrusion detection systems, encryption and hashing are all used to prevent people from modifying data. Encryption also provides confidentiality, but it's also an integrity control. You cannot modify encrypted data successfully without having access to the encryption key. So viruses, DOS attacks, well, viruses attack these things, logic bombs, ransomware attacks integrity. It takes your data and makes it unreadable. All these are integrity attacks. Availability is the third part. This is where it all starts, of course. I often have students say, I have a new product, a new game or something, and what should I do to make it secure? And I say, don't really worry about that. First, you need to get buzz. You need to get someone playing it. You need to have something available before you have some asset to protect, really. Even a rudimentary level of security is enough in the early days when you're just trying to get your product out there and get people to care about it. So availability is often your first concern. And this is where you have to have backup systems and alternative data paths and blocking, filtering traffic for denial of service attacks and all that to keep your services available to authorized users. So hardware failure, environmental problems, and human errors are all often the cause of downtime. So you have backup systems, alternative systems, proxies, backup copies of things, performance monitoring, business continuity planning. So you have a plan of how to deal with it when things happen, like power outages and so on. All these are availability controls. RAID arrays, we have multiple disks working together, are availability controls. They're called high availability systems. So you can't have a perfect amount of all three of these. You can decide what you want. You can have long, complex passwords, which will increase confidentiality, but they will lower availability because your authorized users will frequently forget their passwords now, and the systems will be unavailable to them until they go through some password reset process. And that's the way it always is. More of one means less of another. So auditing and accounting are really important. Auditing keeps track of what people have been doing, and accounting logs it. So you can now see if people are obeying your policy or if they're getting around it. So in order to do this, you have to have identification, where people have a username, they claim to be somebody, then authentication, where they prove that they're that person with something like a password. Then after you know who they are, they have authorization. There are limits to who's authorized to do this and who's authorized to do that. Now, so people are on some list. Administrators can do this, but normal users cannot. Then you have auditing, which records what you do, and accounting, which will then review the log files and determine if people have been violating security policies. So there are AAA services which began for telephone company billing and continue into the modern world of higher tech systems. And this is authentication, authorization, and accounting that keeps track of who people are and what they did and whether what they did is in conformity with policy. So you can have a report like your phone bill indicating what you did and charging you fees for it, or other reports like proving that no unauthorized people have access to secret documents and so on. So here's accounting. Remember, this woman called Octomom had 8 kids, and the hospital workers were interested, and they found her medical records and they leaked them off to the National Enquirer or something, and then they were punished because they had accounting. So they were watching who was looking at the confidential records, and it certainly is the case. Police have used this to like track down their ex-girlfriend's new lover and stuff on police databases, and it's a similar abuse. Even your staff who is authorized to see their data is not allowed to use it for inappropriate reasons, and that's what your auditing and accounting should be detecting. that people are doing the wrong thing with the data. So I got a few cahoots about that. And my Kahoot numbers are a little strange because these are from earlier textbooks and stuff, but I think I've got them organized well enough. 2A1, all right. And I see a chat message coming in, which is here. I only see your Twitter page. Oh, all right. You should see my whole desktop. Let me see if I can figure out what's wrong with the share. Should say desktop, but you should see everything. Yeah, it's what it says. Share screen. Yeah. No upcoming meetings. Let's see. Is it better now? Now I see Sam's class 10 info. Okay, good. That's progress. So how about the Kahoots? Let's see. There should be somewhere like here. Do you see that? The Kahoot page. Okay, good. Guess it's working now. I don't know what was wrong earlier, but thanks for telling me. This is my amateur hour production values. I don't have a way to see what you're seeing. I should probably take another machine and log in as a customer, but I haven't got organized enough to do that yet. Let's see if I can get rid of this thing. All right. And crap. There it is. Okay. January 27, 20. Okay. Good. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right. I think everybody's in. So, if your home page is defaced, what has gone wrong? That's a failure of integrity. All right, somebody has altered data. If you make errors in data entry, what's gone wrong? All right, that's also integrity. The data is wrong. What's the point of a username? You think they're not randomized? That's possible. Yeah, looks kind of bad, doesn't it? I thought I saw that checkbox, but I'm afraid you're right. I think I'm going to stop these and go check. Well, let's do one more. Stay on page. I'm going to do one more and see. I see another chat message coming through. And before they were failed, I thought I checked and they were randomized. We'll try one more. See if there's one more. Okay. What does fault-tolerant systems enhance? Aha, that's what I thought. If you flip a coin 3 times and you get heads 3 times, that does not mean it's not a fair coin. Ha. Availability, ha, so it's not always A. Good. And what does an ACL do? There you go. Okay, that's authorization. Good. All right. So we've got player one. Will have to tell me who they are if they want their points. Erica sounds like a real name. And Kahoot is another fake name. That's you then. Okay. All right, so I know who you are. And I saw a chat message that might be telling you who one of these other people are. Aha, player one. Good, okay. Good, so I have real names. Good, then we can charge ahead. Ha. All right, so here's some other desirable things you might want to have in security. I would make it full screen, but the stinking thing is not working. View. Full screen is Control Cloverleaf F. Okay. Nope, that's still not what I want. All right, anyway. I used to know how to operate this thing, but it isn't working. I noticed that if you run a Mac for more than a couple of weeks without rebooting it, the control keys stop working. Several of them don't work. I have to reboot my Mac. Anyway, so non-repudiation means you can't deny what you did later. So this is necessary. This was enforced by the Digital Millennium and Copyright Act. Before this, you could not borrow money online. You'd agree to a form, say I borrowed it, and later said, oh no, I didn't do that, because there's no actual pen and paper signature, which is normally how you create non-repudiation. Least privilege. Now, Digital Millennium and Copyright Act means that a digital signature counts as well as a pen signature. And so if you promise to pay money back, you're legally required to do it. Least privilege means people should only have as much privilege as they need to have. You don't make everybody the administrator. And need to know means you have more specific, you have horizontal security controls instead of just vertical ones. Vertical ones would be user to administrator, and horizontal ones would be, even though you're the administrator, you're only the administrator over this one region, and you don't have the right to administer the other region. So it's not, those are called vertical and horizontal controls. All right. So this was a big issue because in the 1990s, United States military intelligence agencies had both vertical and horizontal controls. So when 9/11 happened, they didn't talk to each other. Different departments didn't know, and they weren't able to put together the pieces to predict 9/11. So in order to, just like China, after doing the wrong thing with SARS, has to now do too much of something else to look different in this outbreak, even though it makes no sense. The US government took down the horizontal controls so everybody could share data. So then this guy had access to all this data he should never be able to get at, so he could leak it all, which he would never have had under the previous system. So this is the way security is. I mean, you have horizontal controls and they give you a benefit at a cost, and then you tear them down, and that gives you a different benefit, but the different costs. You just can't win. There's no perfect solution. Everything you do has a good and a bad side. Anyway, so a subject is the person accessing the data, and the object is the thing they're trying to access. So Internet Explorer is a subject when it's running in memory, trying to access data, but it's also an object. Someone might try to launch it, and you may or may not have permissions to launch it. And this is certainly the case. For example, all computers are now servers and clients. Your machine is a server. You're typing data into it, it's doing you a service, but when it connects to other servers on the internet, it's a client of them. So, you know, just like people are masters of the people below them and servants to the people above them, nobody's as simple as fitting into just one category anymore. You have to be more careful in what you say. So defense in depth means you have multiple defenses, so one might succeed. So at this college, we have a Palo Alto firewall filtering all the traffic that comes in, and then we run Windows firewall at each workstation also to get whatever attacks were not stopped by the first one. This is the way everybody has to do it these days, because none of your defenses are really that strong. People are sneaking through every layer of defense, so you try to have layered defenses and then network traffic monitoring to detect when bad guys get in anyway. So due care is doing what a reasonable person would do, using seat belts, using ladders instead of climbing on the furniture to reach high things, and so on. And due diligence is the management of making sure people are actually performing due care. So this is a management process, making sure it happens. This is just what should be happening. Gross negligence is what happens if you don't have due care, when people just do stupid things like everybody seems these days to just take confidential data and stick it on a wide open server with no access control at all on Amazon E2C or someplace. Even Microsoft did it last week. it's a sin and a shame, and that's obviously gross negligence when you take personal data and just expose it to the whole world just through sloppiness. But since we moved to the cloud, the #1 concern of all the customers was the security of the cloud, and they were well justified in that feeling. It is obviously true that if you take your stuff and just stick it in the cloud, frequently you discover that you have exposed it to more than you have planned on. So abstraction is a process of grouping things together. So instead of assigning permissions to each individual user account, you do something like group them into groups like sales or help desk, and then you give the whole sales group these permissions. That way you handle an abstract quantity. This is much easier to keep control of than having to treat everybody individually. Data hiding is another way. You can put data in a compartment that's not seen. So so people don't even know data is there if they're not supposed to know. Encryption, of course, scrambles data so that people that are not authorized will not be able to read it because they don't have the ability to decrypt it. That's the idea. All right, so I got another one of these, 2A2 in my glorious system. 2A2, ha, and for the skeptics among you, I noticed the randomization is in fact on, so there. Okay. There we go. It's a little slow. I wonder if I'm on some silly network. Oh, the staff network. Yeah, that's often pretty slow. The design goal was that the staff network would be fast and the guest network would be slow, and the opposite seems to be true in practice. So, all right. Due diligence. There you go. All right. I'll give it another few seconds. Looks like we got everybody. Okay. Okay, why use a ladder instead of climbing on the desks? That's due care, which is doing things that a prudent person would do instead of doing stupid, sloppy things that will cause trouble. Why don't sales staff have administrative rights on their computers? Okay, that's least privilege, good. All right, what's the printer if Joe uses a printer? Defect in these answers, but you can't win them all. It's an object, all right. Janitors leave slippery soap on the floor, so what's happened here? That's negligence, good, okay. So, Shane, all right. And Wes looks like a real name. And Jer also looks kind of like a real name. Okay, neat. All right. Well, let's go to another section. Like I say, this stuff is pretty much review and should go by pretty fast. So then there's governance principles. Now, governance is the management levels here, trying to maintain your business processes. So there's a lot of types of regulation. You got regulatory compliance, you got industry guidelines, you might have license requirements for your software and for your partnerships and so on. So this is when you have to control something, and then you have to be able to verify that that really happened. So you got to have your security function, got to tie into these other parts of your business management, like strategy and goals and such. So you have a business case, which justifies the expense. It used to be, there are two basic ways to sell security. The old-fashioned way is with fear. You scare management, we might get hacked, so give us a pile of money. And that works for a while, and then they say, well, that doesn't really tell us how much money to give you, or justify that we were right to give you the money. Now, increasingly, they would like you to actually justify, why are we going to save money from doing this? And this is why compliance regulations help security people a lot, because you must do this. It's just like HR and taxes, and so management is motivated to spend at least a certain amount of money on things, even though they cannot prove there's a return. They know they have to do it, or they'll get fines, and they can see that cost. So the CSO is the top security officer, and they run this information security team, and they report to high-level management, like the CEO. And so you've got a strategic plan, which would go for years, your general plan of how you're going to maintain security over years, and then you have tactical plans to accomplish certain specific goals, like upgrade the servers to HTTPS and so on. And then you have little operational plans inside the tactical plan, how to accomplish this and that little task. So your strategic plan is long-term, and your tactical plan is little things like a project or a hiring or an acquisition. And then your operational plans are all the little things you do, the detailed step-by-step processes for all the little activities that are going on in your security team. Change control is a big one. Amateur companies just have people changing the network as needed to get their job done, but the more professional ones, you cannot just change something like add another server, another wireless access point, or change a permission. You have to ask permission to do that. It's then considered by change control board and then implemented in a careful way so that they know what the consequences are, and they inform the right people, and they test it, and they always have a rollback plan. So if the change causes a problem, you can roll back to the previous state so we can at least continue business the way it was. This is extremely common, that you try to update to a new server or a new operating system, and it turns out to be a disaster and just make things worse. So you always have to plan to roll back if it doesn't work. So you have to, this is required for IT sec classifications that we'll talk about. This is the Orange Book in the general US government. And I guess I'll fix that while I'm here. All right. So for higher classifications of security, you must have change control. All right. So you implement the change in an orderly manner. You have a formalized testing process to make sure that it accomplishes your goal. Then you roll back if it didn't. You inform the users. You analyze to see whether the change really accomplished what you wanted it to. And then you review it by the change approval board. These are all things you have to do to in a properly organized company that's going to have those higher security levels. So then you got data classification. You might do it by usefulness or age, or the damage that would come if you leaked it, or the national security implications, depending on your business. And then you have restrictions. And you have to consider the classification of data, where you're going to store it, when you're going to destroy it, who's going to have access to it, and all these things. So you have to have a custodian, who is the person that actually does the work of labeling and storing and managing the data. Then you have to have criteria, label everything, document the exceptions, and then have controls, declassification procedures. And then you have to have an awareness program so all your staff knows what to do. Like, why are there two trash cans? One for stuff that has to be shredded and one for stuff that doesn't have to be shredded. And your staff all has to know how to handle documents in accordance with these plans. So in the military, you got top secret, secret, confidential, and unclassified. In business, you typically have public, sensitive, and confidential or proprietary, that sort of thing. So your senior manager is responsible for the security of an organization. Your professional writes security policy and implements it, and the data owner is responsible for classifying the information of a certain type. They own a certain data. The custodian is the one that actually does the work in accordance with the orders from the owner. They obey orders and they actually do the work of testing up backups, storing things. And then you have users that have access to the system, and they hopefully have been trained to know what they're supposed to do. And then you have an auditor, who is the person who gathers data and creates reports to show that you're compliant with security standards. So we got 2A3. That should be in here someplace. 2A3. Okay. For some reason, when I took the CISSP exam, I had great difficulty learning the difference between a owner and a custodian. Now I understand it. It took me like many days of flunking practice tests to get it straight. All right, I'll give it another few seconds. Okay, good. Now people are jumping ship. Okay. I'll give them 5 seconds to come back, and then we'll go ahead with the survivors. There we go. Back up to 12. Better hit while the iron is hot. Okay. So, who is ultimately responsible for the security? That's the manager. Always makes me nervous. Their job is to make sure it all works. And if their staff does rotten work, it's their fault for not firing that staff and hiring better staff or training them or reviewing them. They're responsible to make sure the end result is right. Who makes backups? The custodian is the one that does all the real work. All the rest of them just argue about and manage stuff. It is kind of insane at first how many people don't actually work but are just managing other people at work, but that's how it goes. All right. Which one runs for about a year? That's a tactical plan, okay? And who makes compliance reports? That's the auditor, okay. So let's see, Erica, good. And Wes, good. And Jer, good. I think that's equal to Jer until I hear otherwise. Good. Good. Well, we still haven't been here for an hour. We can do another section. This is good. Like I say, this stuff goes by pretty fast. It's mostly just security plus review. So now we have control frameworks. There are a whole lot of them. They all are pretty much the same in general terms. These are attempts to organize the management and put it into categories. So you have the ISO 27000 series for the international standards. This Zachman framework is a very old, very famous standard for IT management. All these other ones like COBIT and the US government's NIST 800 series and High Trust and Six Sigma. There's just a ton of these, and they all do approximately the same thing. And companies have to meet one of these frameworks to get certain kinds of jobs. So this is the international one, ISO 27000, very famous, typically costs several $1 million and takes several years for your company to achieve this. And the end result is you have a ton of layers of management producing a blizzard of paperwork constantly, proving that you're doing all these things. But if you do, you can now play on the big space like sell to military and huge organizations that require that you obey all these standards. So it's a whole series of documents, many of them. This is the start and end of a very long list: e-discovery and digital evidence analysis and risk management guidelines. There's just thousands of pages of documents specifying all the management things you have to do to achieve this 27,000 certification. Now, the Zachman framework was intended to handle IT, not even particularly security, but it's based on 6 questions like what, where, when, why, who, and how, and then your various levels of management: executive, business, architect, engineer, technician, and so on. You have these. It's just to try to make sure that you have considered all the things that matter to technology and all the things that might go wrong. Then there's this open group architecture framework, which is another one, working with 4 domains. And there's the Department of Defense architecture framework for the military. So it's got these different things called viewpoints, like capability viewpoint, operation viewpoint, and project viewpoint. All these are just different ways of the same thing, somehow trying to organize all the tasks that must be done to set up IT and to use it and to manage it, and somehow sort it into categories so you can make sure that all the essential things are being done. The British has their version of it, the MODAF, very much similar to the last one with various viewpoints. And the Sherwood Applied Business Security Architecture is another one of these: assets, motivation, people, location, and time, logical architecture, and physical and component and service management. It's at first very daunting. My students that have gone out into the industry tell me that these things are really important and they wish they'd spent more time really learning these and memorizing them all. We're not going to do it at the CISSP level, but if we ever get our CISA class going, which is on the books but hasn't been taught yet, it'd be more of these things. These frameworks are in fact really important in the real world. And at first it's pretty daunting, but you have to get used to it.
That's more for the CISA certificate.
I think so, yeah. The CISSP knows the general terms. A CISA would be more into the details here, yeah. And there are, I think, even some people get certified in just 1 or 2 of these. So then there's COBIT. COBIT's another one of these from ISACA. ISACA and other big companies. ISACA wrote this one. And so they've got the main principles: meeting stakeholder needs, covering the enterprise end to end, having a single framework, a holistic approach, and separating governance from management. So these are all just taking the same basic idea that you somehow have to be able to say, what are all the things your management does, and are they doing them correctly? And you just somehow have to set it into categories, and just then you can talk about, we did this right, but we did that wrong. But first you have to classify all the activities according to some pattern, so you can then decide whether you're doing it all and what you should be doing differently. So they have 7 enablers: principles, policy, frameworks, processes. Culture is a big one we're going to hear a lot more about later. Information, people, skills, and competencies. You know, it's easy for this to turn into alphabet soup, but it really matters at a management level. Then the US government has their ones, which is NIST. NIST Special Publications 800 series, and there's a whole ton of these, just like the ISO 27000. So basic security principles, federal guidelines for developing security plans, cryptographic standards is one I use a lot. And you know, on it goes. The Internet of Things, there's just a lot of these. Specifying the official federal government standards for this and that. And they're the recommendations of the American government to govern these parts of security. So in general, after they got these written, the Department of Defense could then compare their system to it, and they found that, of course, it was 95% out of compliance. It's, at least they defined what you should do, but they are no way ready to actually do that. And this can get people upset, but this reminds me of like the TSA report leaked about 3 years ago. The TSA has a test every year where people try to sneak guns onto airplanes. And they found that 95% of the time they successfully snuck the gun onto the airplane. And people freaked out and said, you guys are useless. And they said, you don't understand. The previous test, 98% of the guns got on the airplane. We're doing better. But I mean, this is, of course, the problem. It's pretty easy to write down what you should do. But in fact, getting that done is expensive and hard and complicated. And, you know, very few people are actually doing it. And this is obviously the case because everybody and their brother's getting hacked and just leaving data sitting open, and leaving doors open, and letting idiots with knives wander into the White House and threaten Obama and fly helicopters over it. All the security is in practice not working too well, but at least we've defined what it should be. And now we're beginning to measure where we are. And then hopefully we can begin to move towards actually accomplishing some of these things better. What's that?
Idiots in Congress.
Idiots and kroners?
Congress.
Oh, well, it might not even be idiots. It's actually really hard to do. Even big companies like Google and stuff that are certainly not idiots still can't achieve too much of this. Anyway, so this is often the case, and this is how things happen. This is one I thought was pretty good. There's like all these different compliance frameworks. So people get fed up and try to make another one, and now there's just more. That's what tends to happen. So they proliferate. By the way, I heard a very interesting podcast yesterday of people that are developing a new kind of venture capital fund with a special name that I've already forgotten. But this point is, they say the security space is far too fragmented. I saw a presentation from Richard Wu last semester that blew my mind. He had like a slide with 100 brand names up there. And these guys say the average corporate security team has over 75 products deployed to manage security. He said, this is just insane. It's making everybody crazy. There's thousands of companies. We are going to have a huge consolidation of the market into a few companies, like somebody like Cisco and Microsoft and McAfee should just buy up a bunch of companies and make big frameworks so we all don't have to go insane. And they say that the investment companies are trying to encourage this. They're trying to find ways to pick the companies that really should consolidate, and because it's crazy. We have far too many ways of doing the same thing. We need a smaller set of choices with big sweeping solutions. Yeah.
You're saying the investment companies are trying to encourage consolidation?
Yes. Yes. Because they think that's the road to the future. All these little companies, like I remember when I went to RSA like 6 years ago, there were like 50 companies on the floor, all of which said, borrow our one gadget and it will make you secure. And then next year, 3/4 of them are gone and their gadget is now junk. And this happens all the time. So you really should sweep it up into a few big companies with big management suites that are going to last for a while. Anyway, so HITRUST is a company here that establishes something called the Common Security Framework used in the healthcare industry. And is it out there?
Yeah, it's out in the hallway. I don't know.
Okay. Well, anyway, if they wander away, we'll be all right. Anyway, these guys got 14 categories: compliance and physical security and incident management and business continuity. They've all got the same basic components. It's sort of like Chipotle. There's like 10 things and they can make different amounts of them, but there's really only 10 ingredients. You shuffle them around differently, you call it different. This one's an enchilada, this one. So, all right. Then these guys have the critical security controls: hardware assets, software assets, vulnerability management, administrative privileges, and secure configurations. For viewpoint of network monitoring, I should mention, continuous monitoring is an old thing for this, vulnerability management. You run vulnerability scans and see if people are obeying them. This is not at all the same thing as network monitoring for intrusions, which is the newer thing. Anyway, so you got more of these things: malware defenses and data recovery capabilities and so on. And more of them: instant response and management. That's why, the security is exploding. There are tons of classes, tons of certs, and managers are just befuddled. I mean, why do I need 10 different teams and 8 compliance frameworks? And how am I ever going to make sense of all this stuff? We're in need of consolidation. Anyway, then you got the COSO framework with more of the same kind of thing. COBIT was the framework that's defined from this. COSO was for corporate governance. And then you got Octave, which is what Carnegie Mellon came up with. A small teams, this is Octave Allegro. It has these phases: establish drivers, and then assets, threats, identify and mitigate risks. Then you got the ITIL, another process management standard developed by the Office of Management and Budget, which are the people that decide whether policies are going to change the amount of money available for the federal government and such. It's just every little group has invented their own standard. They have a security standard in this thing. And then they got a whole bunch of publications for that. Again, with the same story: change management, incident management, capacity management, demand management, and so on. all different ways of accomplishing the same thing. And then there's 6 Sigma, which is your process improvement standard, where you control something, then you define what you're trying to accomplish, you measure to see if you've accomplished it, then you analyze to see how you can do better, improve it, and now go to control again, and you go around and around here. All these things are intended to be closed loops where you're continuously improving. If you are not continuously improving, then you're going to lose control very fast because the landscape and technology keeps changing so fast. So you have to keep running just to stay in your place. Anyway, so here's the 6 Sigma. Another thing: design, verify, define, measure, and analyze. Another way to do it. And then there's the capability maturity model, another process improvement, where you it's all the same story. You define what you're trying to do, you measure how well you've done it, you try to improve it, and then you go around and around in a circle. All right. And you have various maturity levels. We're going to see a lot more about these as we go up into the ITSec Orange Book. You have some initial level of maturity, and then at the very top, you always have optimizing. This is where you actually have a closed loop where you constantly improve things and measure and then improve them more. That's the best. And there are various, the initial is where you just make it work at all. And then there are levels in between where you are more and more clear about what you're accomplishing and more able to prove that you're actually making it better and better. You got the CRAM method. Their terms, as you know, this is the UK technique: identifying value assets, identify vulnerabilities, and then identifying prioritized countermeasures. All right, and this one's one that came out a while ago with XJCD2, where aircraft designers know that their airplanes are pretty good, elevators are pretty good, but if you ask software engineers about computerized voting, they say absolutely not. And this is hard for normal people to understand. And the fact is, security people are really bad at what we do. The fact is, you can hire security people and buy all the best stuff, and then you still get hacked. It's kind of insane. And managers that ask, like, why did I bother paying you guys if I still get hacked? There's not a good answer to that question. This is not science. I'm sorry. We cannot prove that we're worth anything. In fact, there's a pretty good argument that we're worthless. Everybody just gets hacked anyway. So, but this is like when you're in the middle of a crime wave and the gangs are just shooting each other in the street, you hire more cops. Even though you can't prove it's helping, it seems like throwing more cops at it would be a step forward. And that's us. So it's job security for all of us right now as the world burns around us. But it's not like we have a handle on what we're doing, and you can prove that hiring a CISSP to protect your company will save you $1 million than just hiring someone with a Security Plus. It's not really that true at all. Anyway, so upper management defines a security policy. This is the right way to do it. This is what you must do. The top management is the people that have the ability to spend money. You can't get anything done without having some money and time. So this is what you must have. Your upper management must be in favor of security. If they aren't, you will never make it. This is very strongly pushed in all the CSSP training materials. They say if you are a low-level staff and you decide to try to make the place more secure, but upper management is not supporting you, you're a fool, you will never make it. And a lot of people make the mistake to say, we've got to fix this problem, and they yell at management, management ignores them, and they start drinking and getting crazy and hacking things and dumping data on WikiLeaks and in general going mad because upper management ignores them. This is a very common syndrome, and just forget it. If management will not agree with you and they're not providing resources, then you will never succeed. You just have to forget it, go to another company, or just put it out of your mind and not do it. You cannot make security plans from the bottom. You have to make them from the top. Now, what you can do is you can go to upper management and present to them skillfully why your idea is good and persuade them to support it. And that's why I'm just glad you got to do presentation and written documents. That is part of your job. You should be able to explain to management why your security idea is good. But if they don't buy it, then forget it. They've got to buy it and support it, or it's not going anywhere. And therefore, your real job is to make sure you're right and then be able to clearly explain it to management. Communication is essential. Anyway, so I got 1D here, and I think maybe that's enough for today. Let's check after this. We'll see what slide we're on. All right, 1D. Good. All right. All right. That's quite a name. I don't know if that's Greek or Russian or what that is.
Hebrew or Russian?
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe Russian. I don't know.
Thanks a lot, Ken.
If he wins, I'm sure I have no idea who that person is or she. Anyway. Now there's a name. I can understand that name. Anyway. All right, I'll give it a few more seconds to see if we get back up to 12. Two people may have already fallen asleep. Can't get in, huh? Oh, I'll give you a few more seconds. Have you been getting any videos from the King of Saudi Arabia? You haven't been getting videos from the Prince of Saudi Arabia, have you? Okay, well then you're probably all right. Then you're probably all right. All right. I guess we'll carry on this way. All right. So, which framework is mainly in the healthcare industry? Oh, man. I think I remember. This is the kind of thing that's hard for me to remember, too. I'm glad I already passed this test.
Is there like a time limit for renewal?
You have to keep submitting training, or you have to take it over again every 3 years.
Okay.
I'm doing it by submitting training. You have to do so many hours per year of training. Now, high trust, I think it is high trust. Good, okay, all right. All right, which framework comes from ISACA? Hey, I think I know this one. Yeah, no, why would there be? You know, I think there's no reason to be so many of these things. There ought to be like 1 or 2 that win and the rest should go away, but that has totally not happened yet. It's COVID is the ISACA one. All right. Which one is from the US federal government? This one is even easy to do. I bet, yes, they should. NIST, National Institute of Standards, is what US government agencies do, so that should be pretty easy. And which one comes from the International Organization for Standardization? Which sounds like a very fine thing. Someone should standardize all this stuff. Yep, that's ISO. All right, good. So, Jared didn't, he ran 1 3 times. Jared deserves it. And that horrible name I can't read one, so we'll have to come out of the closet. J-E, you're the horrible name. Okay, good, good. And what is this J even? That's Erica. Good. Okay, good. Oh, good. We've run 3 times also. Good. All right. Well, let me check what slide we're on. I'm kind of inclined to say that's enough. We are on slide 83. That'll do. I just have to make a note to pick up for 83 next time. All right. So I think that's enough for tonight, which is good. We started kind of late. Let me see if there are any chat messages. Oh, there are. Uh-oh. Recent news. The more cops doesn't always help. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, Seattle police increased patrols before the last shooting. Yeah, that's the point. A good point. It's a fairly common issue that, you know, just adding more cops doesn't necessarily make things better, but sometimes you have no better idea. It's sort of like China. Let's block all the travel. That's got to slow it down. Well, not really if a bunch of people already left, but, you know, it seems like we're doing something. Whereas if we just do nothing, then people will yell at us. Now you say, well, we did something. Anyway, all right. So I'm going to stop the share. I'll see you folks next week. And I think next week we are at the official time. Let me bring up my schedule, make sure there's no holiday or something. Nope. So next week we meet at 6 o'clock and we'll do it again. And you should be thinking about a topic and turn it in by the week after that. All right. I'll stop the share and the meeting. All right. I'll